Senator Middleton, do you believe that your bill creates religious labeling?
No.
You don't believe that requiring school districts to put this on the ballot doesn't label a school district as religious or not religious?
So you're against elected trustees having to take record votes like we do?
I'm asking you whether or not you believe that requiring a school district whose mission is to educate, requiring them to put on the ballot whether or not to have this in the schools, does that label a school district as religious or not?
So should we get rid of record votes in this chamber because it labels us?
I am asking you a question, Senator.
No, it doesn't label them. If you're an elected trustee, then you should have to take record votes on policies for your district.
Do you believe that a family who votes against this will be labeled as religious or not religious?
Well, they're not voting against it. They're just not sending in a consent form.
So let's talk about that consent form. Why is it that the consent form requires the parent to waive their rights under the First Amendment?
So it's not created as a litigious vehicle in order to sue the school district because you're voluntarily agreeing to this. It's the same as waivers you sign when you play sports, right? I mean, when you go get on the bus to go to a different venue to compete, similar things.
So if that's the case, why is it that if a parent rescinds their permission, they cannot also rescind their waiver of a right under the First Amendment?
Because the rescission shouldn't be a way to create a litigious position, right? In order, like the atheists here, which are against the bill, American atheists, actually I'm glad to see them opposed. It means I'm on the right side here. To create that challenge, essentially. Just as a subterfuge, essentially.
So are you assuming that everyone who would be against, who would not sign this waiver is an atheist?
No, what I'm saying is it's a choice.
So a family that never signs this permission slip still has rights under the First Amendment if their child is coerced in school for religious purposes. But a family that does not sign a permission slip does not have rights to defend their child against religious coercion in school.
You cannot be coerced under any situation.
Really?
Right.
That's
the key holding in Kennedy versus Bremerton. It's coercion.
The key holding in Kennedy, actually, was that the individual, the coach, was praying not as a school function, not with a captive audience. And that was the exception, wasn't it?
Well, as you know, it went quite a bit farther than that with the Lemon Test.
But that was the holding, that was the fact pattern that underpinned that decision, right?
What led to the litigation over those 8 years that eventually, yes, Coach Kennedy won.
Whereas your bill, unlike the Kennedy decision, requires the school to organize the prayer time, does it not?
It does. It determines up to the school, or it leaves it up to the school to determine what's best during their particular, school schedule and hours to pick what works the best for them.
And isn't that in direct contravention to the Kennedy case's holding?
No, it's not.
Because the Kennedy case said the school was not organizing the coach's prayer, correct?
The Kennedy case spoke to individual liberties, and this is what this does: religious freedoms and free exercise. That's what that case spoke to. That's what this bill does. That's what that consent form allows, is free exercise of the individual's right to exercise their faith.
So are you concerned that parents will have legitimate claims under the First Amendment, and that's why they must waive them in order to take advantage of this prayer time?
No, but it should not be used as a tool by organizations like this, which Madalyn Murray O'Hair is how a very small group of litigious atheists took away prayer for everybody. And obviously
that is without this bill, students can pray before school, they can pray after school, they can pray at lunchtime, they can pray during recess, they can exchange religious tracts with their fellow classmates, and none of that is prohibited under current law. You're aware of that, right?
That's correct, yes. Yeah.
So why do we need this bill?
This establishes a period of prayer during school hours. What you're talking about is before or after, like the moment of silence, meet me at the pole. That's another good example. There are clubs that meet after school, for example.
So this bill establishes the school organizing prayer.
That's right.
And you don't think that that's a violation of the U.S. Constitution and the Texas Constitution?
No, because there's no such thing as separation of church and state. That was in a letter from Jefferson to the Danbury Baptists that has been twisted completely out of control, and the Coach Kennedy case made that clear.
So you just don't like the Establishment Clause, is what you're saying?
Well, I think you're saying you don't like the Coach Kennedy ruling.
Actually, I find the Kennedy ruling quite solid, and I don't find that your bill comports with it.
Well, it does. We'll have to agree to disagree.
But you just don't believe that the Establishment Clause should be enforced?
Because they changed their lens. That was the old test, Establishment Clause. Now the test is free exercise. In other words, it was looked at harshly, like the endorsement test is now gone, right? That's gone.
So have you reviewed any of the debates leading up to the U.S. Constitution and the Establishment Clause?
Actually, there was a very famous one at the Constitutional Convention where things were not going very well. And Ben Franklin said, you know what, we need to begin our day in prayer. This is really not going too well. And then when they did that, things started to go well. So yes, I have reviewed the history.
I pray every day, Senator Middleton. So your assertion that someone against your bill is not religious could be seen as very offensive. Do you see that?
I don't think it's our position to decide for everybody as those atheists did in the 1960s. A small group decided for every Texan and every Texas child and public school and educator, you don't get the right to pray during school hours.
Now, I agree with you on that. I agree that a small minority should not be the arbiter of the very personal religious pursuits of everyone else. I completely agree with you on that. And in the debates leading up to the writing and the passage of the U.S. Constitution, the New England members of the Constitutional Congress argued for a religious test. You're aware of that, right?
Sounds very familiar. I don't have the passage you've got in front of me.
And the Federalists denounced it, saying that a religious test would go directly against the bulwark of religious liberty. That in order to assure religious liberty, we were to do everything we could to avoid religious tests and religious labeling in the United States. You're aware of that, right? You're a lawyer.
This is not a religious test, if that's what you're referring to. It is not. That's the Abington case, I think, that you're referring to. And students were compelled to participate in prayer and Bible reading. And this bill doesn't do anything of the sort. It allows the school district to choose, and then after that, allows the parent to choose, and of course, the educators and students as well.
But if a parent does not choose or rescinds the choice, so if a parent does not choose, they still have the right to defend their child against coercion by a school-organized prayer time. But if they do opt in or rescind having opted in, they have signed away their right under the First Amendment. Isn't that true?
They haven't signed away their right. They've signed away their right to sue the school district for damages for something that they agreed to. And this bill contemplates this by prohibiting prayer, for example, over a loudspeaker, right, where there's no way you can tell if everyone's consented or not consented, and it prohibits that in the bill specifically, that is not an acceptable method to implement this. But then it also goes on and to say that they need to work with or should work with the Attorney General in developing this policy to make sure that it is voluntary, right? I mean, I think you support that it's voluntary. You agree with that?
I would absolutely agree with the idea that there is no religion worth respect that isn't come to humbly and individually without coercion by the state. Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you, Senator.